I thought, as a lot of people did, you know what, I'll move my plants into semi-hydro. It's going to be so much easier. I didn't consider how to fertilize in semi-hydro. If you're like me, stick around, and in this video, I'll give you a bit of a crash course of all the things that I learned in terms of how to fertilize when utilizing semi-hydro. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you everything that I've learned, hopefully in nice kind of understandable bite-sized chunks, to make sure that the plants that you are growing in semi-hydro are not just surviving, but thriving, getting lush growth, and also learning from my mistakes and other people's mistakes so you don't make them as you are kind of traversing through the fun journey, I would say, of growing plants within semi-hydro. This isn't just for the people that are growing in semi-hydro. This is a key video, I would say, for anybody thinking about moving into semi-hydro and trying to get their head around how to fertilize. Now, the one caveat I will say to this is, as with anything else, people will do things in their own ways. We don't have to agree with this, but I am hopefully giving you a bit of a skeleton here of things that you can kind of grow and learn and research on in individual chunks to see how you would want to grow in semi-hydro. These are based on my experiences, what I'm going to be talking through now, and also from other people that I know have grown successfully in semi-hydro. So without further ado, let's go. So the first thing we do need to be looking at is the differences between kind of growing in soil type growing medias and in semi-hydro. And I know we're going through the basics here and people with the back going, I know this already. Stick with me, this all links into things that I'm going to say later on in the video. So obviously with a soil type media, because it is growing and it is organic, there are microbes within that soil structure. And I also include things like cocoa here, especially if it's got things like orchid bark in it, or even something like mycorrhizal fungi, or even possibly something like worm casting. Worm poo! All of these things carry certain microbes with this, and this is necessary when looking at how to fertilize plants. Conversely, when you're looking at something that's in semi-hydro, and by semi-hydro you're thinking of materials like just pure perlite. Also looking at things like LECA, light expanded clay aggregate. So the little LECA balls, or anything along the lines of Pon. And I know Pon is the commercial term for Lechuza's product, but the semi-hydro mixes that you'll get that usually has got lava rock, it's got pumice, it's also got other elements that just make it really, really chunky. It's all kind of inert and inorganic material. So it means no microbes are present within that growing media. Very much the opposite of what it would be if it's in soil. What this means for you is you are controlling everything in terms of the nutrient needs of that plant in semi-hydro, much more so than you would ever be doing in soil, because even if you do things slightly wrong or slightly a bit more laissez-faire about what's happening within the soil, you don't have that luxury with a semi-hydro, because that plant is entirely waiting for you for its nutrition. Both the macronutrients, so the NPK values, and I've done a whole thing about fertilizers as a general, and I'll link the video at the top there. And you're looking at your potassium, your nitrogen, and your phosphorus, basically. So all of those things, those are your macronutrients, but also your micronutrients are going to need to come towards from you, basically, for that plant in semi-hydro. So things like calcium, things like boron, if I'm not mistaken, copper, iron, all of these things, you are then responsible in fullness for your semi-hydro plants. Kind of a simple kind of example that I can give this in day-to-day terms is the soil is basically a fully stocked fridge. It's got everything that the plant kind of needs, or it has the capacity of having everything that the plant needs. Whilst with semi-hydro, it's an empty pantry, and you are then responsible for every single meal that that plant will get. And again, I've spoken entirely about the difference between how a plant will kind of utilize food, and it's not the fertilizer, it is light, in the photosynthesis video, and I'll link that at the top there as well. So let's touch a bit more about what is actually needed in terms of fertilizer within a semi-hydro setup for your plants. Obviously, I just mentioned now, you're going to need something that has got the NPKs, the macronutrients. These are the three main building blocks in order to help the plant photosynthesize. So again, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You're going to need these in there. And the other element of this is the micronutrients that I was talking about before, which are helpful for other processes that the plants are going to do, as I mentioned before, and I will kind of add a list of them here. As I said, I go into more detail within that fertilizer video that I linked earlier on in the video, so you can go and have a look at that in a bit more detail. And that is key because both the macronutrients and the micronutrients are entirely your responsibility. I cannot stress this enough for people to realize this, because essentially if you're not adding any of that to your plants, you might as well just be growing a cutting in some plain water. And you know that that is good to help the plant root out, but by and large for most plants that is not going to be enough to help them get bigger, bushier, healthier, kind of leafy growth as well. And you need to kind of adjust in terms of what you need to, or what you're after essentially. So if you are growing house plants in semi-hydro for foliage, there is, and I'll touch on this in just a second a bit more, there is a foliage specific fertilizer that you need to be looking at that is meant for semi-hydro. If you are growing plants specifically for blooms, like an orchid potentially, there is this bloom specific fertilizer, much like you would have with anything growing in a soil media. It's just going to be the NPK ratios that are going to be slightly different, and potentially if it's got any micro nutrients in there as well, that might vary as well slightly. And it's key as well for a lot of the times when you're looking at things like semi-hydro fertilizers, if you can, to look for something that is more of a complete fertilizer rather than the individual compartments. Because, and I think, was it general hydroponics was the one thing that was really available to a lot of people when we were all first starting off with semi-hydro like 5 or 6 years ago, and there wasn't quite as much of a boom as there is now, and you'd need to get your kind of macronutrients and or your green, your foliage boost, and you'd need to get your bloom boost, and then you'd get your micronutrient boost, and you'd need to be like crazy mad scientists to mix all of these things together. But by and large these days you can get complete fertilizers that will work within semi-hydro. A lot of the newer fertilizers, there's two big ones that I can think of in the UK, without naming names. One comes in a white bottle, the other one comes in a black packaging, used to be a pouch, I think now is a bottle, that you can use in both soil, and they're complete fertilizers, and in semi-hydro. And it's just how much dilution you will add of these things if you're doing it in semi-hydro versus if you're doing it in soil. So there is a lot more options available for people, and I'm pretty sure that this is the case not just here in the UK, but globally now. You're getting more of these complete semi-hydro fertilizers. I would highly encourage, if you're just starting off, start there rather than trying to control everything on an even more granular level, because it does feel a bit like you're spinning a lot of plates at the same time, and if you can avoid spinning quite as many plates at the same time, it's usually a good thing. The next bit, I need my list here as well, because I need to remember specifics to kind of mention to you, and it's all about choosing the right fertilizer. Again, kind of growing on to what I was just talking about a moment ago. So if you can get a complete fertilizer, do go for a complete fertilizer, but there are a lot of the brands that are kind of more well known. I mentioned one, so General Hydroponics was one of them. MSU Orchid Fertilizer is another one I think that has come up when I was doing my research. Dynagrow, Foliage Pro are some of the ones that are kind of out there. If you are based in certain parts of the world and you are growing semi-hydroponically and you've had successes with certain fertilizers, please do let everybody know down below, because most of us will know what's available in our own region, but if somebody's starting off and they're wondering what's best to use or what other people have had successes, I'm thinking of people in America, in Canada, in the Far East, in Europe, Like all of these places, do let people know down below what has worked for you and what brands you swear by, because it will save a lot of people an awful lot of research. Wouldn't you have liked it if you could have found that information a bit easier rather than having to scour like the internet for days on end or hours on end to find what you need to be doing? Be kind, rewind, or in this case, be kind, share down below. Go for something that is more of a balanced ratio. So something that's a 5-5-5 or 10-10-10-10-10-10 might be a bit too much for semi-hydroponic, or something with a 1-1-1, 2-2-2, 3-3-3, something that is balanced. If that's what you're going for, it can be a 3-2-1 if you're looking at things that you're looking to promote things like the foliage over the blooms or the blooms over the foliage. Like, you'll see how it goes there, and it will generally tell you what it's aimed at within the packaging of whatever fertilizer you're trying to use. The other big thing is here, and I mentioned the brands here, the black bottle and the white bottle in the UK. Those are ones that I know for a fact will do both. But I cannot stress this enough. Do not assume that you're going to be putting in, I'm going to buy a fertilizer that's meant for soil. So most fertilizers out there are meant for soil growing media, and it's going to do fine in semi-hydro. Some of them might, but a lot of them will also rely, part of the reason how they're kind of created is they rely on microbes within the soil to do certain things to that fertilizer liquid in order to make it available to the plants within the soil. In a semi-hydro media, because again, remember what we were talking about before, the microbes do not exist. It is a sterile media, the LECA, the Pon, the perlite on its own, all of these things, it's a sterile media. So there is no microbes there in order to help break down that fertilizer that's meant for the soil in order to make it available for the semi-hydro. So a lot of the times, not all of the times, but a lot of the times you might be doing this going, at least I'm doing something, and it might just be doing nothing at all. You might as well just stop wasting your money and just be adding water in that. Does that make sense? So try as much as you possibly can. Semi-hydro, if you haven't figured this out, and I'm really sorry if I'm going to be the one bursting the bubble, and I will hold your hand whilst I say this, is not a cheap hobby. Plants generally don't become a cheap hobby these days, but semi-hydro, you kind of kick it up a notch because there's more things that you need to get in order to keep things happy. Again, you can do this on budgets, but for a lot of people, it starts to get a bit more expensive, basically. So bear that in mind. The other big thing, and I can do an entire video on this, and again, you can always tell with these videos when I can say I can do an entire video because there's a lot to cover on this. You need to, as much as possible, be making sure that whatever solution you're adding into this, and this is where we're kicking it up a notch to more advanced kind of features or advanced scenarios and things that you need to be doing, you need to make sure that the pH of whatever that water and fertilizer solution that you've got going into a reservoir or into a semi-hydro setup is kind of where it needs to be. And as I said, this is a very complex thing because certain plants and certain ways of growing need certain types of pH. The same thing with certain fertilizers need certain types of pH in order to avoid things like nutrient lockout, if I'm not mistaken. And that just means if the pH is off, either too acidic or too alkaline, that fertilizer, parts of that fertilizer, or sometimes even the entire fertilizer, the nutrients, are locked out, which means that they are not available to the plants, which again, you might as well just be watering with regular water and stop wasting your money on a fertilizer. Does that make sense? So pH is also key. So this is the topic I was going to say. If you want a separate pH topic for both semi-hydro and kind of soil-grown plants, do let me know down below and I will add that onto the list. But how do fertilizers work within a semi-hydro setup? So let's take the example of LECA, for example. And this is, that was a bit redundant. For example, I said that twice, apologies. But this is going to apply to any semi-hydro growing media that you have. So in the most basic form, the media that is within that water reservoir, so if it's LECA in a pot and it's all the way down to the bottom of the pot, what is touching the water reservoir is going to be slowly wicking up that water and that nutrient solution up to the rest of the plant, specifically the root mass of the plant that is within that LECA Pon, whatever it is that you are growing in. Sometimes, so that will kind of soak up and that will kind of filter up towards the roots if they're higher up. As the roots will grow into the pot, those roots themselves will also go within that water reservoir, and then they become adapted to sipping water with a nutrient solution directly from the water itself. There is still a risk of some root rot there, even though those roots tend to be kind of what people would class as water roots, but you still need to be aware of how clean that solution is at the bottom of the pot. The other thing that becomes really important, again, remember those roots that might be within that water reservoir. This is another reason why a lot of the times semi-hydro fertilizer within that water, so that fertilizer solution, needs to be on the weaker side rather than the stronger side. So, and again, this goes for most fertilizers. If the packaging says 1 teaspoon to X volume of water, do half of that, do a quarter of that, even more so with the semi-hydro. The reason for this is you want it to be on the weaker end. It might be a bit longer and it might slow it down a bit more, but it's the most secure way of doing it, because if it's a bit too high for any one single plant, and the packaging, even on the semi-hydro one, it'd be like, yes, definitely use a teaspoon. I will still at least halve that, basically, because you don't know if your specific plant in your specific semi-hydro setup, if that nutrient solution that works for 90% of other plants in semi-hydro might end up creating kind of chemical burns or nutrient burn within that plant. So halving it a bit more, yes, it might mean that it will slow down most of them a bit more, but it's at least a buffer there to make sure that you're not over-fertilizing. If you wanted to as well, you could also get something called a TDS meter. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, total dissolved solids, and it's like something to measure what in the water isn't just water, if that makes sense. So what else is kind of within that? A lot of the times you'll get TDS measuring devices for tap water, for instance, so that people can see quite how hard a water might be in a location. This might give you a better indication, because if you know that, you know what, with my water solution, when you crack it, and this is the big thing with semi-hydro, is when you crack it, stick with it. Don't try to keep fiddling all the time, because that's when issues happen. When you get it just right for you in your space with your plants and your setup, keep at it, and you need to be very exact. And this is where you start going down the mad scientist rule, because as most scientists know, if you've got something and it's going right, you've taken measurements and you've taken notes to know exactly what it is, so you can replicate it time and time again. So for example, if in your space for a liter, a gallon of water, whatever you're measuring your water in, you need the packaging says to add 1 teaspoon of fertilizer, but you add half a teaspoon, and that is working pristinely for you, take that down. Because the reality is, if you're using tap water, it will be the same every time, and if it's the same fertilizer, it will be the same every time. So that will be your recipe locked in. What you can do is go a step further if you're really worried that things might be changing a bit, and get a TDS meter and measure what the total dissolved solids are in that solution. Take that number, jot it down somewhere. It might be 300, it might be 400, it might be 435. And then every time you water, you can remeasure and just go, okay, you know what, we're still good. That then avoids if there's any kind of fluctuations within your kind of drinking water or the water that you're using in order to create that fertilizer solution. Or also it will give you some heads up, because a lot of the time brands will change the formula of their fertilizers and not always necessarily tell the consumers. So all of a sudden you just say, I've always been using this, my water hasn't changed, neither has my fertilizer as far as I'm aware. Why is everything struggling now? Because the fertilizer, for legal reasons, for whatever reason it might be, might have changed their formula, and something like a TDS reader might give you that heads up a bit faster, because if it's the same every single time, why is it vastly different this time? So what are the common mistakes that you'll get if you're fertilizing in semi-hydro? First one, mentioned this earlier on, and I cannot stress this enough, using a soil fertilizer that is exclusively for soil, not the ones that can do both, but the ones that are exclusively for soil, to water, to fertilize your semi-hydro houseplants, because a lot of the time, even if it can work and you're not just kind of better off just using water, it probably won't be providing the micronutrients to the plant, because a lot of the times the micronutrients need those microorganisms within the soil in order for them to kind of function well. So that's one big mistake that you should be able to avoid relatively easily by just using more specialized fertilizer. The other thing is mixing your solution too strong. You'll get leaf burn, you'll get chemical burns. The roots might struggle a bit too much. Always try to, if you can, halve what the packaging, even of the specialized semi-hydro fertilizer solution says on the packaging, because then at least you can avoid that as much as possible. The other thing that most people forget, and it's something that you really need to make a habit of if you're doing it, if you're kind of growing in semi-hydro, is the big mistake is never flushing your media. And it will get salt buildup, especially on things like LECA or Pon and things like that. And that could also then cause issues to your plant, because you're just like, nothing has changed. I'm measuring everything with my TDS and the water's the same, the fertilizer is the same, nothing has changed. Why is this struggling too much? Because you've had salt buildup within that growing media, the LECA, the Pon, whatever you're using, and it's causing issues to your plants. So the best suggestion that I would have there is get into the habit. If you've got something that reminds you that you need to be fertilizing like once a week or once every month or something like that, once a month is also roughly how often you should be flushing the media. And by that, I mean emptying the reservoir, making sure that that hasn't got any salts remaining within it, and then just using clean water for that watering without the fertilizer in order to flush out those minerals. If you can kind of get it to kind of run clear and then give it a reservoir of just water, that's even better. If you don't, then just make sure that you're flushing it once with clear water for one of the waterings that you are doing within that month. And then the other big thing is not paying attention to your pH. So the wrong pH. So, and I've got an example here as well, because I can give you a specific example. For certain nutrients, something like iron that plants do need, so this is a micronutrient, it will get locked out if the pH rises above 6.5. So things like that, you might be sitting going, I'm giving everything that I need, and if you're specifically adding iron to that because the plant needs the iron for the functions that the iron does for it, and again, the fertilizer video goes into more detail on that one, but the pH is wrong, that plant isn't actually getting any use of that iron because it's getting locked out. The pH is stopping that from being able to be absorbed within the plant. How about we touch on a practical fertilizing regime for your semi-hydro plants? So the first big one, half or quarter strength of the fertilizer within that fertilizer solution every time you refill your reservoir, just to be on the safe side. Monthly flashes, we've just talked about now, monthly flushes, English, once a month to make sure that the salt buildup is being cleared, and adjusting according to the season, which you would do anyway for a lot of your plants that are growing in soil as well. So less fertilizer in the winter, more fertilizer within the growing spring and summer months as well. So a couple of examples, and I've got them written down here. So for instance, you're growing a monstera in LECA. So you'd need a foliage fertilizer with added micronutrients in that in order to keep it happy, because obviously you're growing a monstera predominantly for its foliage. However, if you are growing, say for instance, an orchid in semi-hydro, it might be a bloom booster with slightly higher phosphorus levels in order to encourage those blooms to happen. So it's just adjusting to what you want the plant to be doing, and that's how you adjust in terms of what the fertilizer needs to be that you're adding for that plant. Does that make a bit more sense? Now, some advanced tips that I have for the people that are considering and growing in semi-hydro, or people that are already growing it in semi-hydro. So the first one would be, if you are going to go down the checking your pH route, and I would suggest this, especially if you wanted to get into kind of a bit more of advanced care with this, is try to keep your pH around 6 to 5.5. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to disagree with me. If you do let us all know down below and tell us the reasons why on this one. That tended to be the more safe region in my experience. And you can get certain things, and this is again, brand new world. So obviously you're going to need something to measure your pH. but you're also going to need something that is usually called pH up or pH down. So it can adjust what the pH of that water and fertilizer solution is so you can get it in. So if you've got a pH strip or you're testing the pH and it's saying 7 and you need to bring it down to 6, you add pH down to bring down that pH, and then you would measure again, and then you're like, oh, it's 6.5, I need to go a bit lower, add a bit more pH, minus pH. Does that make sense? And this is going to be, by and large, every time. Or at least you're going to be measuring the pH every time you're kind of fertilizing and adjusting accordingly. I did say this is next level advanced here, but for the people that really want to geek out on this, it gives you things to do. I loved it because I played like mad scientist. It was absolutely fantastic. I got to relive my chemistry days again. It was great. The other thing is making sure to consider things like adding CalMag, so calcium and magnesium, if you're in a very hard water area. And I'll let the people that do this on a regular basis mention this down below. My words are like struggling today, but yes, do let people know. Everybody who does use CalMag and you've got hard water in your area, mention to everybody below why you do this. And then I would also suggest investing in something that could also, like a fertilizer that's a foliar feed as well, just in case the roots struggle for whatever reason, things go a bit sideways, then at least you do have a way of providing some nutrition to the plant that it can absorb through the foliage, and it doesn't have to rely on the roots if there are certain issues that are happening there. So my final thoughts for this. The thing you need to remember with this is your semi-hydro media isn't feeding your plants. It's not giving it the fertilizer. It's not giving it its micronutrients or macronutrients. You are solely responsible to provide that for your plant. Get it right and you get incredible growth and nice and happy plants. Get it wrong and you might be fertilizing, you might as well just be using water. So making sure that you're getting it right is going to be the difference between success or failure a bit on that one. Again, make sure that you're doing regular flushes, making sure that if you want to go that extra mile, testing the pH, maybe getting a total dissolved salts, a TDS meter, finding that, using the right fertilizer for your plant and also the right fertilizer for your growing media. Try to avoid using soil fertilizer, exclusively soil fertilizers for your plants that are growing in semi-hydro. And those are the big takeaways for me. If you want, again, a more advanced version of this video for the people that have been doing this for a while and you really want to geek out on that, do let me know down below and I will do a follow-up for this video as well. I have started to put all of these more sciencey and kind of geeky videos together in a playlist that I will link there. So things like the photosynthesis video, things like the mycorrhizal video, the fertilizer video, this video will go into that as well. And anything that's kind of part of this series, I will put within that playlist. I'll try to link it on all of these videos moving forward. So if you've not had a chance to look at any of the rest of them and you want to do a deep dive on those, you can go and find those within those playlists. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.